Well, Coach, analysis a little bit, backwards, forwards. What you guys didn't do quite well enough the other day, and what do you have to do better at Cincinnati?
Yeah, I thought in that game in particular, I thought our defensive intensity to start the game wasn't at the level that it needs to be at when you're, facing the individual talent kind of that Baylor had. I thought we let Carr, his first three that he made was entirely too easy, and I think gave up 15 points in the first 4 minutes of the game. And then if you kind of do the math on the rest of the game and to the last couple dunks they got, you probably only gave up 30 points, 35 points over the rest of the game. And so I just thought our defensive intensity to start wasn't good enough. And then, probably the two most important parts of the game that gotcha was the start. And then in the second half, when we did get it to 47-44, felt like it was kind of stuck on that score for about 6 minutes. We were getting stops, but we weren't able to mirror that with finishing. Finishing when we got the ball in some areas that we wanted to get it to, and then some costly turnovers during that stretch as well were probably the two areas that cost you in that game in particular.
Starts for several straight games. I mean, it's easy to say you got to get a start better, but is there a formula, or how do you build that in?
Yeah, for a large part of the season, we were getting off to really fast starts, and we were kind of having a harder time finishing. And then really started in the Arizona State game. We got off to a slow start there, Arizona, then you come back for the last two at home, and so it's a combination of a lot of different things that you're looking at. Obviously, we're evaluating that, and looking at it, and it's not just one singular issue. It's a lot of things. Some of it's personnel issues, some of it's coaching issues, some of it's not finishing and not, you are getting the ball where you want to get it early in these games, and maybe you're not making the play, and so then you got to evaluate as a coach, well, maybe that's not the best way to start these games. But everybody's kind of had their hand in it, across the board. If it was just kind of like one person that you felt like was creating slow starts, well, maybe you wouldn't start that person. But it's kind of been a little bit of everybody's had their hand in it, and obviously we've talked about it and have looked at it specifically, like, hey, is it something particular that's causing it? And haven't kind of settled in on one thing in particular, just other than needing to get off to better starts.
When you're playing a repeat game, do you spend most of your time on what they did well against you, or do you try to anticipate the adjustments that they're going to make the second time around? How do you go through that?
Yeah, combination of it all, and that's what's kind of unique in the time period that we're in college athletics. Is here we are already in February, and you're still kind of experiencing a first with your team and your group. This is the first time you've played a team for the second time as a group. Now, we've all done it, but collectively, and so, yeah, you're looking at it, okay, like the first time we played, hey, like this is some things they did that hurt us, and you would imagine that they're looking at that and feeling like, hey, we have an advantage in these areas, and what can you do to counterbalance that? And then also predicting things that you did to hurt them, assuming they may have a counter and not let you do that. And these games have such small margin for errors. I think the biggest thing you can't forget in all these things is you got to be good in the margins. You got to get loose balls. You got to get second chance points. You've got to do your best to continue to rebound the ball really well, and make sure that the game you're not getting too singularly focused on plays and actions and strategy, which is very important, but you can kind of lose the foundation of just competing.
Talking to Mark Kellogg last Thursday, and he said with the way the schedule's gone, he hasn't had time to work on some things that he'd like to, because it's all game planning. There's some fundamental things that you want. Have you had a chance to do that? There's some things that you'd like to clean up that you haven't been able to do?
Yeah, certainly not in that last stretch we were just in. We were in Arizona for a week. You come back Saturday. You have to play Tuesday night. You play Saturday. The game being played Thursday this week, it probably did give you at least one day, which was today. You took Sunday off. Yesterday was a film session. You kind of put to bed the Baylor in last week, and you do have that extra day to practice, which you do need. Because again, you can game plan and you can strategize and X and O, but there is the game itself and the flow itself that you need to practice on as well.
Was there anything particular that you wanted to work with him on?
I just needed to make sure our spacing. Again, when you go back and you look at your good possessions that we've been able to have, you've usually had really good spacing, and that allows players to make decisive and aggressive decisions with the ball. And then, the last couple games when we've gotten bogged down a little bit, like spacing has been poor. And how can you use some of the ways that people are guarding you and make sure that your spacing isn't getting in the way of how you can attack that?
Ross, kind of different beat here, but how are guys like Forsyth, Barning, how are those guys developing and, coming along at this stage?
Yeah, they've been great, man. They've been an integral part of everything we're doing, and a large majority of that is spent on the scout team, and helping prepare us while also, getting reps and improving as individuals and getting stronger in the weight room. But they've been great, man. They helped us a ton, and helping preparing us, and they get to learn a lot because they get to learn a lot of different actions that other people may run and playing some different defenses. But that's where they've helped us the most.
Cincinnati any different from last time you played?
They've been a little banged up. Primarily like Sincere's been out the last 7 days, I think, with illness, and Shauna Bev hasn't played the last couple games, but not too fundamentally different.
Going back to John's question for a second, do you find that the best players, when you get into the rhythm of the season, do the best players, are they able to differentiate game prep practice sessions versus the practice sessions, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, again, yes, because a lot of it is, again, we have an experienced group. They've played a lot of college basketball, so even in their kind of like, whatever you want to call it, biorhythms, or like they know if we played on a Saturday and you got to play on a Tuesday, that Sunday's going to be a heavy recovery and a film day, and then really on a one-day prep on a Monday, you don't have a lot of time to work on yourself as much as you would like. So, and then they know, like on a day like today, like, hey, we're gonna have to get out here and we got to get better today. And getting better is, getting after it a little bit, and iron sharpens iron, and practicing. Like, so yeah, they understand the difference.
Ross's film yesterday different than any other time, just because of the extra time you have on the other side of it, or is film?
Film, because of the little extra time we had, yesterday's film really allowed us to focus solely on us coming out of last week. Typically if you would have had to play tomorrow, or if you had the Saturday-Tuesday game, then you're going to have to like do a little bit of both. You're going to have to watch a little bit of the game you just played, but then you've got to get immediately into your prep. And so that extra day allows you, like I said, repeating what I just said, but it allowed you to really just focus on yourself in yesterday's film session, with not having to use any sort of bandwidth or concentration on talking about Cincinnati yet.
Not what the doctor ordered, but that can't hurt. I mean, to be able to actually sit down and focus on something rather than moving on to the next opponent.
Yeah. Yes, because again, so much of this time period, John mentioned, like you do, that Coach Kellogg mentioned, like you can find yourself, all you're doing is preparing for who you're playing, and you don't get a lot of chance to like self-scout or self-correct. And so that gave us an opportunity again to look at some different spacing attacks and, looking at how people are guarding you now and how can you take advantage of how you're being guarded.
Spacing a couple times. Is that the number one thing that you feel like you need to correct on offense? And is there one on defense?
Yeah, I would say offensively was again spacing, and within the framework of your spacing, like understanding where the attacks are going to come from, and that allows players to be more aggressive and more decisive with their decision making. And then defensively, there for a while, like a big emphasis was like our communication, our defensive spacing, and our defensive awareness. I think we've improved in those areas. I thought in the Baylor game in particular, it was just like some very simple fundamental breakdowns that shouldn't have happened, that did happen, and then just taking the accountability on it. It wasn't like a learning, it was more of like an executing.
There's a lot more emphasis this year on calling illegal screens, width of your legs, arms, things like that. Does that change the way that you have to teach when we're setting screens? This is how you've got to set. This is what you have to do.
Yes. Yes. I think anytime you still got to execute fundamental, and the angles are important on your screening. I think a lot of times when you have poor angles, the initial setup of the screen, your angle's bad, and now the defender's able to take a path that you didn't want them to go, and now you're sliding into them at the last second just because your original angle was poor.
In terms of tempo, obviously you guys are a slower tempo team. Is that just plain philosophy, or is that personnel driven?
Combination of both. Combination of both. Again, defensively, if you look at teams that are typically elite defensive teams, the tempo is going to be a little slower because you're going to guard for longer stretches of time, and unless you're a high turnover team. A lot of times, like high turnover teams, are feast or famine. They either turn you over or maybe they allow something to happen fast. Defensively, we do a pretty good job of getting back and keeping the ball in the half court, and it does take a little while to score on us, which naturally is going to slow the tempo of a game down. And you look at like tempo, again, think, Houston, who no one ever really asked them about their tempo, by the way, but they too defend, and so it's just going to cut the game in your tempo numbers, when you look at them, you're really only talking about a couple possessions a game. Maybe you average 63 possessions a game, and that puts you at the 350th tempo, but 65 possessions a game, which is just three more possessions, may put you in 175 to 200. So it's a combination of both. And then, there's no secrets at this point in time. Harlan's not exactly, while he can move, he's still not an elite runner, jumper. Jasper's not an elite runner, jumper. A couple of your guys can really benefit from that. Chance, Amir, that's usually why the tempo picks up when they're in the game. So it's a combination of both of those things. Some of it is personnel driven. Some of it is this is the way we play.
Looking throughout the Big 12, and I just kind of thought it was funny in that it's mostly a league of inconsistencies where, like Carr, for example, that Cincinnati game, worst game of the year that he had. Then he comes and makes shots the next game, and you probably go into that game thinking, okay, well, he's not playing that well. Teams shoot 65% one game, and then they turn around and shoot 35% the other. How do you preach consistency to your guys when all around them it's a roller coaster, I guess?
Yeah, I think what it illuminates the most is typically the most consistent players and the most consistent teams have the most consistent results. And so if you look at the best team in our league at the moment, Arizona, I don't think you're going to find a ton of variance from game to game in their performances. Now, it's basketball, so like a player from game to game may not have his best individual shooting game, but the best players also find ways to impact winning even in the midst of maybe having an off night from a shooting standpoint. So I think, again, the best players are the most consistent. Even in the NBA, I mean, there's a reason why Steph Curry, and maybe, another player can do what Steph Curry does on one night of the week, but Steph Curry can do it 4 nights a week, and he can do it 2 nights a week. And so you really are challenging your team and challenging them as individuals to be consistent. And typically, like, can you develop consistent habits? Can you develop consistent routines? Are you consistent with how you approach treatment in pregame and the night before? And people with really consistent life habits also tend to be consistent players.
Like the first game with Cincinnati, I thought you guys really handled their post players, which I kind of thought was going to be maybe an advantage for them going in the game. So in that minds of consistency, can you just say, hey, let's just go do their post players what we did the first time? I'm sure it's probably not that simple, but is there anything like that involved at all?
Well, some of it was, your game plan and, what you're trying to take away from your opponent. And it kind of gets back to the first question. When you're playing an opponent for the second time, you do have to have some anticipation that they watch the film too, and they may have a way to either to get those players involved at a higher level or have a different plan of attack to what you were trying to do to them. And so much with those guys, like, Bob is so talented and Thom, they have such great length that you gotta make sure you're not giving them second chance points, and you got to keep them out of transition. And in that first game, they had 18 points off our turnovers, which a lot of those were direct runouts. And so, you got to, like I said, you got to make sure you're doing the little things in the margin, blocking them out, making it hard on them, and not giving them easies.
On the topic of screening, and this just might be me, but I watch Honor, who's 155 pounds, but he puts like every ounce of it when he screens. And you said that maybe Harlan can't move the quickest, but the last game he screened somebody, knocked him backwards, and he created space, and he caught the ball and drove and almost dunked, right? So it's there, but like, is that across the board? Is that something you're looking at too, as maybe a way to just make the offense more crisp, more open, just more consistent screens? Because I think anybody watches basketball and says sometimes a guy just goes to the spot, doesn't hit anybody, just cuts. That's probably natural too, but where do you think you are?
Yeah, it goes to like executing. Again, I think you can fall in the trap, as a coach in particular, when maybe you're not having the level of success that you would like to, hey, we got to do something different. Let's put in a new action. Let's put in a new play. But sometimes it is just executing the simple things, like you mentioned, of a screen, of a screening angle, of your spacing, fundamentals of faking a pass to make a pass, and not trying to like solely get away from actually playing the game. Like, you got to play the game. And to your point, screening is a big part of it, and executing what you're trying to do. Again, you could have the perfect play call at the perfect time, but if you set a bad screen or a poor screen or whiff on your screen, then the play's not going to be executed the way you want it to.
Or harder to call plays, obviously, like, all right, I can trust this guy to screen, or we just don't have it today, but it's evolved in everything you do.
Yeah, no, you got to execute. Yeah, I mean, doesn't matter, there's old sayings, it's not necessarily, what you're doing, it's how you're doing it, and again, I was a Cowboys fan, still am to this day. It's harder, but, when you had the triplets and, you knew it was 3rd and 5, and everybody in that stadium and everybody watching on TV knew we were about to run a slant to Michael Irvin, and you couldn't stop it. And they really did. They had 4 running plays and about 5 pass plays, and you just couldn't stop it. So, to your point with the question, sometimes you can get like, well, let's do this and let's do this and let's try this. And some of it's like, well, let's just do what we're supposed to be doing simply and execute it well.
Anything else? On football. What's your Super Bowl Sunday plan? Do you go right to film or do you take some time for the game?
Well, we have the bye, you know, after the Tech game, which we need, you know. It'll be our, you know, it'll be the bye that we get. And so, yeah, I'll watch the game for sure.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.